Hey everybody, my name is Jake, and this is my instructional video on how to turn your iMac into an aquarium using my kit. I've designed the kit to be as easy as possible to put together using standard tools and do-it-yourself skills. The following instructions detail every step of the way from disassembling the iMac, to modifying the case, to reassembling the aquarium using the kit provided. There is one step in this process that I want to caution you about, and that's discharging the CRT monitor inside of the iMac. A CRT monitor has a high voltage anode inside of it. It can carry a charge of up to 25,000 volts. If you don't discharge the monitor, or if you do it improperly, you can get electrocuted. There's also a chance of physically damaging the fragile neck of the CRT, leading to violent implosions as the vacuum is released. Also, don't think a CRT which has been powered off for a long period of time will be safe. The CRT can slowly build up a residual electrical charge. If you do not have the necessary experience and tools to properly discharge and make a safe CRT, you shouldn't even take the plastic cover off. If you're not comfortable with working on the electronics inside of your computer, I recommend taking it to your local computer or electronics store and having a professional disassemble the computer and discharge the CRT for you. Follow the following instructions at your own risk, and only if you're comfortable working with the electronics inside of your computer. But these steps must be performed at your own risk, and I cannot be held responsible for any injury or death that may be a result of electrical shock. Now that my disclaimer of injury and death is finished, let's continue. These instructions are specifically for a slot-loading G3 iMac. You can build an aquarium using this kit out of the tray-loading style iMac, but you'll just have to customize a base for your tank to sit on. It'll take a little extra customization, but it is possible, and the tank and everything fits just fine. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on tearing this iMac apart and getting it ready to be modified and put back together as an aquarium. Let's start out by going through what comes in the kit. First and most important is the aquarium tank. As you can see, the tank isn't square, it's custom sized to fit inside of the iMac, as the iMac is not a square computer. There's a little protective film on the front and the back to keep it from getting scratched, and on the bottom you can see this 1 by 6 inch piece of acrylic with 2 holes in it where you'll screw mounting screws into the aluminum base plate to hold the tank in place. This is the power cord for the aquarium. You'll plug both the aquarium's air pump and the rope light into this. This is the power cord for the rope light, and this is the actual rope light strand. These are the 2 mounting bolts that'll adjust the angle at which your tank sits, the end cap for the rope light, and the connecting splice to connect the actual light strand to the power cord, and an on-off switch and 2 wire connectors. A couple of zip ties for tying down the rope light, the Whisper 3i air pump, the actual filter that goes inside of the aquarium tank, the air hose to connect the air pump to the filter, and a piece of Velcro to attach the filter air pump to the base plate. So those are the pieces included in your kit. Now let's go ahead and get started taking this iMac apart. Let's take a look at what we're going to need to put this aquarium together. These are the basic tools you're going to need, but you can always improvise or substitute to meet your needs. First off, we have a flathead and a Phillips head screwdriver. You'll also need a wire strippers, but if you don't have one of those, a regular pliers will work just fine. You'll need a hot glue gun and a couple of glue sticks, some electrical tape, and some kind of rotary carving tool. This Dremel works really good. I use 2 separate bits. I have a more aggressive bit, and then I have a finer bit for some of the more detailed areas. As long as you have something that can carve away plastic, it'll work just fine. And I always use a power drill just to speed things up a little bit. A set of clamps will come in handy later on, and last but not least, a hammer for smashing things. I like to use a wire buffing wheel to polish the aluminum base plate, but if you have some sandpaper, that'll work just fine. And don't forget about safety. Have some safety gloves and some eye protection. This case is pretty banged up. Plenty of scratches, stickers, and scuffs all over the place, but with a little bit of polishing compound, a 6-inch buffing pad, and a drill, you can make it shine like new. This one's been polished, so it's all shiny and new looking. It's a different color, but you get the idea. Here's what I use. It's a solid polishing compound that you apply to a buffing wheel. You can use anything just as long as it says polishing plastic to a high shine or something like that. I usually get this at Harbor Freight, but you can also find it at Lowe's or Home Depot or any hardware store like that. This is a 6-inch buffing wheel I find works the best. Just attach that onto the end of your drill and buff away. And I always squirt on a little bit of automotive detailer wax. It adds a little extra shine to the case when you get done. So let's get started tearing this iMac apart. Go ahead and lay all your tools out on your table, throw your iMac up there, and we're basically going to take apart the whole thing. We're going to take out every screw in this thing. Go ahead and flip it upside down, use our Phillips head screwdriver, and take out the 2 screws on the bottom of the case. Then you'll use your flathead screwdriver and pop off the little plastic cover, and underneath you'll find find 4 more screws and go ahead and take those out too. You'll want to put all these screws into a little container because some of them you're going to need later. Once those screws are out, you should just be able to lift the case off of the bottom of the computer. On the bottom part of that case, you'll find 4 screws. Go ahead and pull those out and then use your rotary carving tool or Dremel or anything you have to just carve away those little tabs so you can remove that bottom support arm. We don't need that anymore. Just carve it off and throw it in the trash. Back to the iMac, there's 6 screws holding on this steel mesh piece. There's 2 on the back, 2 toward the front, and 2 kind of angled down toward the hard drive. You're going to go ahead and take all those screws out and pop that piece off. Save at least 4 of those because you'll need them for reassembly. With that piece gone, we've uncovered the motherboard and the hard drive and the memory and everything else, so we're going to go ahead and take out all the screws holding that stuff on. There's 6 or 8 or 10 screws here, a bunch on the motherboard and then 4 more up that hold the hard drive in place, so go ahead and take them all out and pop everything off of there. There are 2 screws tucked right in close to this USB hub port that you're going to want to leave in there because we're going to use that piece later during reassembly. Once the motherboard and the hard drive and everything else is off there, just look around the outside of this case. You're going to find 5 screws holding the colored part of the case to the side rails, and then there's going to be 2 more screws kind of up in the corner underneath the speaker. There's actually 4 screws underneath there, so you kind of got to hunt around for them and just take all those out of there. Then if you flip it around to the front, you'll notice these 2 little gray tabs, and if you use your flathead screwdriver to pry those off, you'll find 2 screws hiding underneath that you'll go ahead and take those out too. With those screws out, you can go ahead and flip it on around and just use a little screwdriver, flathead screwdriver or something like that, and you're going to go ahead and pry off the front bezel. Sometimes it takes a little bit of wiggling and jiggling. Some are stuck better than others, but with a flathead screwdriver or something like that, you should have no trouble getting it off. I usually go ahead and pop the Apple logo out and put it somewhere safe, that way you don't lose it. Once the front bezel's off, you can see 2 more little screw covers. You'll use your flathead screwdriver to pop those off, and then your Phillips head screwdriver to take those screws out. With those screws out, you should just be able to pop the back part of the case off of there. There are tabs holding the front in place, so you'll press down a little bit and then pull those sides out, and the back part should just lift right off. Now that we've completely uncovered all the electronics, follow the following instructions at your own risk, and only if you're comfortable working with the electronics inside of your computer. If you're not comfortable with working on the electronics inside of your computer, I recommend taking it to your local computer or electronics store and having a professional disassemble the computer and discharge the CRT for you. A CRT monitor has a high voltage anode inside of it. It can carry a charge of up to 25,000 volts. If you don't discharge the monitor, or if you do it improperly, you can get electrocuted. Also, don't think a CRT which has been powered off for a long period of time will be safe. The CRT can slowly build up a residual electrical charge. So be familiar with what you're doing before you start. I cannot be held responsible for any injury or death that may be a result of electrical shock. So that's my disclaimer of possible injury or death. The first step is obviously to unplug the monitor and leave it alone for a few hours. A minimum of 24 hours is recommended, but a few days or a week would be even better. Wear rubber sole shoes, gloves, and safety goggles. Take off all your jewelry, especially rings and watches. You don't want to be grounded in any way. Find a heavy flat-bladed screwdriver with good insulation. Also find a heavy gauge insulated wire with alligator clips on each end. Attach one alligator clip to an unpainted portion of the iMac frame. Then attach the other alligator clip to the screwdriver's metal shaft. Make sure that neither you nor the screwdriver is in contact with anything metal. The anode is the wire covered up by the suction cup on top of the CRT. Hold the screwdriver with your right hand and hold your left hand behind your back. You'll want to slide the screwdriver under the suction cup until you come in contact with the metal. You may hear a loud pop or see a blue flash. Wait 30 minutes and then repeat this process. So again, these instructions are to be performed at your own risk. At this point, we're going to flip it over and remove these screws and this little bracket that hold the back part of the side rails in place. You're going to want to keep these because we'll use them during reassembly. Then flip it around and take out the screws that hold the side rails to the front inner bezel. Some of the screws are hidden underneath of that wire, so just pry it up till you can get to them and take them out. There's 4 screws, 2 on each side on the top, and then there's 2 more screws, 1 on each side, hidden underneath on the bottom. With all those screws out, the side rails should just fall right off. Pop the front inner bezel off and toss it aside. We don't need that piece anymore. At this point, you'll flip what's left of the monitor up on its face, and you use a flathead screwdriver and a hammer or pliers or a knife or anything like that to cut away those little plastic tabs that are holding the CRT board onto that aluminum base plate. There are 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top. I like to use a flathead screwdriver and a hammer and just pop them off of there. Now you can go ahead and cut your speaker wires and the other wires that run right down below the speakers. Find this wire on the back that connects the back of the CRT to the aluminum base plate, and you can go ahead and give that a snip. It's not connected to anything, and it's safe to cut with a wire cutters. Once you get that cut, you can flip the whole CRT assembly over to the side and look for about 7 or 8 little screws that are holding that CRT board to the base plate. You're going to want to take out all those screws, and that will remove the rest of that CRT from the aluminum base plate. Set the CRT to the side. We're done with that for now until you can recycle that at a later date, and we're going to go ahead and clean up this base plate by stripping all the wires off, all those pads, and pulling off the speakers. A couple screws will hold those wires in place, and then there's 2 more screws holding that plastic piece on the back. Take those 2 screws out and keep them, and also keep that little plastic piece as well because we'll use it during reassembly. Use a flathead screwdriver and just pry up on the little speaker tabs and pop them off of there. Now that we've got the iMac completely disassembled, we're going to go ahead and start modifying the case and other various parts so we can get it ready to be put back together. Let's start out with this aluminum base plate. You're going to notice all these little studs sticking up out of the top of it, and what we want to do is take a hammer and knock all of those out. So I like to use a socket, lay a socket down on the table, place the aluminum base plate over the top of the socket, putting those stud right in the middle of the socket, and then just giving a good whack with the hammer, and those will pop right out. Or you can just set it on the edge of the table or a bench or anything like that. Like I said before, I like to use a wire buffing wheel, but also a piece of sandpaper works as well to polish this base plate up a little bit. Usually, probably after whacking it with the hammer, you've got some dents and some dings and some scratches here and there, and it really doesn't matter because once you put your tank in there and gravel and decorations and everything, you're not going to see much of this aluminum base plate at all. But I'm kind of a perfectionist, and I like things to be sparkly and clean and cool looking, so I use a wire buffing wheel and I just give it a good once over just to kind of buff out some of those scratches and stuff like that, give it a good brushed metal look. Next, we'll take the steel mesh piece and we're going to cut a rectangle out of the back of it. This will be for our power cords to go through from the bottom of the aquarium up to the top of the tank for the power cord and for the filter. So use a 10 snips or wire snips or something like that, and go ahead and cut a little rectangle out, or you can just cut 2 strips down the sides and use a little hammer to fold that piece back over and smash it down. Next, we're going to cut the motherboard off of this USB port hub. So go ahead and use your 10 snips and just cut a little bit along and just remove as much of that motherboard as you want to, just so you have a little bit left around that USB port hub. Should look something like this when you get done. Now let's get carving. Go ahead and grab the back part of the case, and we're going to carve some of the plastic tabs off of this so we can make it easy to lift on and off of the computer. The first thing we're going to carve out is this really funny looking piece on the top because it's ugly and it's not good for anything and we don't need it anymore. So go ahead and get your Dremel. Basically, we're just going to cut along this line. We'll give it a rough cut at first, and then we'll come back through with the Dremel later and give it a smooth it out a little bit. There you can see it looks pretty crappy, so now we're going to come back through and fine tune it. Nice and slow with this. We're not in a hurry or anything like that, but you just want to go through, take little passes at a time and get it nice and flattened down and smooth. Usually it's easier just to clamp this down to a table if you can, that way it doesn't wiggle around when you're trying to get it nice and smooth. Now, like I said, just go real slow, nice and smooth, even passes, and carve off all that ugly crap and get it down just kind of flush with the original part of the case. When you're done, it should look something like this, just nice and smooth. We're going to want to do the same thing with both tabs on each side of the bottom part of the case and the tab on the back. So go ahead and with your carving tool, just carve off those 2 tabs, and I like to go all the way from the front to the back and just smooth it out and give it a nice even look. When you're done, it should look something like this, just nice and smooth. And moving along to the front bezel, there's 2 tabs on the bottom of this piece, and we're just going to do the same thing with that. Clip them off of there and smooth them out just to make it look good. And that's about it. We pretty much got this thing modified to where we can start putting it together now. First thing we want to do is start out by installing the tank adjusting bolts. So we're going to put these bolts, they're going to lift up the back part of the tank to set your angle. so that way the front part of your tank can sit nice and flush against the top part of your case. Go ahead and find these 2 holes on the bottom part of this base plate. I've kind of circled them here to make them easier to find. You don't have to use these exact holes. These are just ones I use all the time. Your base plate may look a little bit different than this, but you want them in this general area. They don't have to be in that specific spot. You will have to crank on them pretty hard because they are cutting their own threads into that aluminum piece, so don't be afraid to put a little bit of elbow into it and crank on them to get them to power their way through there, and then they should pop right out at the top. I usually put them through about halfway, which seems to be a good starting point for adjusting the back height of the tank. Again, you're going to want the heads on the bottom and the top of the screw coming up to the top to hold up the tank. Once those are in, we'll install the USB hub simply by inserting the 2 tabs back into the little square holes that it came out of, I guess, and then laying the steel mesh piece over the top and installing the screws. Just make sure that USB hub gets seated in there nicely and that the tabs are secure into the holes. To put that mesh piece back on, you'll use the little teeny coarse threaded screws, 4 of them, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Put it back together just the same way it came apart. The next thing we're going to do is install this little plastic bracket back onto the back of that aluminum base plate. Just snap it in place, and you might have to tap it with a hammer or the end of a screwdriver or something to get it to pop into place. Now we'll attach the side rails. I usually brush them up a little bit if they're a little dusty or dirty or anything like that. You'll notice you have these kind of medium-sized coarse threaded screws. You'll have a long one and a short one. Go ahead and use the short one for this. It doesn't really matter, but the short ones are the ones that came out, and they're a little bit easier to power into that plastic than the long ones are sometimes, so go ahead and put those short ones in there. So there's 1 screw that goes in the front of these side rails that holds it to that aluminum base plate, 1 screw on each side, and then in the back we'll have that funny little shaped bracket with the 2 screws that hold that back arms of those side rails together. It's easiest to flip it over on its top, line up the ends of those side rails, and then install that little bracket with the 2 screws. It fits in there like so, and then you just put those screws in. Now for the fun part, installing the tank. If you look on the bottom of the tank, you'll see that little 1x6 inch acrylic piece with 2 holes screwed in it. When you line that tank up onto that bottom aluminum base plate, you'll notice that those 2 screw holes line up with the holes on that base plate. You're going to want to line those screw holes up on the second row back. That's where the screws will come up through the bottom of that aluminum base plate and tap into that clear acrylic piece. So go ahead and line those holes up on the second row back, like I said, and then you'll flip the whole unit over and put those screws in from the top now. You're going to want to be sure to use those medium-sized short screws. As we've seen earlier, we have the short screws and the long screws. Make sure to use the short screws because the long screws are obviously a little bit too long. They're just there to hold the tank from sliding all over the place and falling out the front or anything like that. So get them as tight as you can, and if you can't get them completely tight, it's no big deal. Now let's go ahead and get this light put together. Go ahead and grab your rope light strand, your power cord, your end cap, your splice connector, and your 2 wire connectors. So about 6 inches back from the plug, you're going to want to splice one of those wires and install the 2 wire connectors to it. So pick a spot about 6 inches back, make a little splice, pull the wire apart a little bit, use your wire snippers or pliers or anything like that to cut away the wire a little bit so you can install your wire connectors and crump them into place. Once you're done, it should look something like this. Now get the connecting end of the power cord and your splice connector. Go ahead and line up the 2 prongs with the 2 holes and plug it into place, and then use the wire nut to screw it in real tight. Then with the pointy ends of the splice connector, you're going to want to plug those into the wire strands on the incandescent rope light. Make sure to get them in there into that wire nice and good, because that's your connection for the light, and if you don't get it connected just right, your light's not going to work. So take those 2 pointy ends and shove them right into the little wires that are sticking out of that plastic sheathing. Then take this nut, slide it onto the other end of the rope light all the way around, and thread it onto that splice connector. Go ahead and use a pliers if you want to, and give it a couple extra cranks and make sure it's nice and tight. Now we'll put the end cap on. I usually like to use a little dab of hot glue just to hold it in place and give it a good seal. Now we can install the switch into this little plastic cover, which was about the first thing we took off. Go ahead and find the middle of that plate. It should be about 7 holes down from the top or the bottom. I've kind of marked it out here a little bit, and you can use a little teeny drill or your Dremel, anything you can use to kind of carve out a little square big enough so you can pop that switch into place. I always use a little dab of hot glue just around the edge to hold it securely in place. Once that glue cools down and sets up, we can go ahead and plug those wire terminals into the power switch and go ahead and give it a good wrap with some electrical tape or something like that. It doesn't matter which terminal plugs into which prong on the power switch because it's just an on-off switch, so just plug it in any way you can and give it a good wrap. We're now ready to install the Aquarium's air pump. Just pop these little feet off the bottom of this air pump. We don't need those anymore because we're going to use some Velcro to hold this air pump to that aluminum base plate. I like to use a little bit of hot glue to dab into those holes because it makes the pump a little bit quieter. Dab a little bit of hot glue into those holes, and then right away you're going to want to stick that Velcro onto the bottom of that air pump before that hot glue gets hard, and then go ahead and attach that air pump to the aluminum base plate. If you're looking at the face of the aquarium, you're going to want to install it on the left side of the tank. You can put it in the back, but I always like to put it right in this little hole on the left side of the tank and make sure that it's not touching the tank or that side rail or anything like that, so that way it doesn't vibrate on anything and make any more noise than it should. You'll want to unwind a little bit of the power cord and then just route that power cord straight back and run it underneath of that side rail. There's a little bit of a notch in that aluminum base plate where that power cord will just tuck right down in there, and then just run it right around underneath into the rectangle hole that you cut in earlier, and we'll plug it in a little while. Next we'll take the rope light and do the same thing with it. We're going to plug it right up through that rectangle hole, up through the top of that mesh piece, and then we're going to run it around on the right side, up the side rail, over the top of the tank, and down on the other side of the aquarium. Now would be a good time to install the speakers, so just grab your speakers, make sure you got them facing the right direction, and snap them back into place, and then pull that rope light right on around and tuck it right down into the side rail like right here. Just kind of wedge it into place there. It should look like this when you're done. Then you can take the excess cord and wrap it up a little bit and put your wire tie back around it. Then just tuck it right back down underneath that aluminum mesh piece, and then tuck the extra cord right down around that speaker and underneath of everything. We're going to use zip ties to hold that rope light in place. And to help hold the top of it in place, we're going to carve a little notch with our Dremel or our drill or anything like that into the top of that side rail, just to hold the zip tie from slipping over the top. It doesn't have to be very deep at all, but just something that the zip tie can rest itself into. Then go ahead and run your rope light right up that side rail, over across the top and down the other side, and maybe just touch it to the top of that speaker, and that should give you about the right length so the curve on the top of that rope light matches the curve of that clear bezel where it meets the back part of the case. My little trick is to bend the zip tie in half. That way when you poke it through the little hole in the bottom, the front part of it sticks back out at you, and it's easier to grab that way. Just kind of poke that through there, wiggle it back out, and zip tie it nice and snug right in place, and then clip the edge off. Same thing with the top. Pull it nice and tight, put a zip tie around, and tighten it up, and clip the end off. Keep going over to the other side, zip tie on the other side, and down on the bottom. Use that same procedure across the other side, zip tie at the top and zip tie at the bottom. That should hold your light in place, and then flip it on back over, and we'll go ahead and put the rest of the extension cord on. We're going to use a little bit of hot glue to seal this connection, and that way in case you spill a little bit of water or anything like that, it's just a little extra protection so water doesn't get in any of your electrical connections. So go ahead and put a little hot glue or silicone or anything like that on the end of that plug and plug it into the extension cord. Go ahead and put a little bit on each plug and then plug them in. If you want to get really creative, you can add an extra accessory in that third plug hole. I've had people add power adapters for their iPhone or their iPod or anything like that. That way they can charge their iPhone or their iPod right off of their aquarium. If you get really creative, you can even wire it in to the USB hub port on the side. So you can kind of do whatever you want with that. Experiment, play around a little bit, or just leave it as is and put a little hot glue or silicone over those 2 holes, prevent any water from getting in there if any spills or anything like that, and call it good. Once that glue sets up, you can go ahead and take that whole bundle and just shove it right back up and hide it all underneath that wire mesh piece. That way the only thing you have sticking out is just your power cord and your wire for your switch plate. Make sure you got a little bit of play for your switch plate, because you're going to need to poke it through the bottom part of the case when you're assembling this, and then you can go ahead and use a zip tie to secure that power cord plug at the base there, just so it doesn't move around a whole lot. In the same fashion as you did for the power cord for the air pump, you're going to take this power cord and route it underneath of that side rail, plastic side rail piece, and out through the little notch, and then it'll run out through the actual original power cord hole on that side rail. So take the cord, lift up the side rail piece, and just slide it under like so, and out that little notch. Snap the bottom 2 parts of the side rails back in place, and just kind of poke your wires so they're kind of hidden, tucked in that little groove, and everything kind of feels and looks good there. Let's go ahead and take 2 of those smaller screws and install them on the inside holes on the bottom part of those side rails. Go ahead and wrap that excess power cord up and get it out of the way for now, and then let's move along to polishing. Go ahead and grab the back part of your case, your high-speed drill, your buffing pad, and your buffing compound, and let's give this guy a good polish. I usually just hold the back part of the case on my lap, on my knees, power up that drill, add a little bit of buffing compound to the drill while it's spinning, and just apply it to the case. Deeper scratches, you'll have to buff a little bit harder. Go ahead and take your time. Make sure to wear safety glasses and gloves. I even wear a mask when I buff, that way I'm not breathing in any of the dust that comes off of that buffing compound. So just have at it with that whole case. Buff away, polish, 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 polish. The more you polish, the more it's going to shine. I usually like to buff in a circular motion, and then I move it around quite a bit and hold it in different light to make sure I've got all the scratches out. Once you think you do, you can go ahead and wipe off any excess buffing compound, and go ahead and give it a squirt with some turtle wax or some Armor All or some automotive spray or anything like that, and give it a little wax, and it'll really bring out that shine. Then we'll do the same thing with the inner bezel and the bottom part of the case. Just hold that between your knees or clamp it down on a table or anything like that, and just kind of polish away. Once you've got the plastic polished, you can go ahead and attach the front bezel to the back part of the case. Just kind of snap it into place, align the tabs, press it in, and use your hot glue gun to go along each one of those tabs and put a little dab of glue on each one to keep it from falling apart. I usually just put 1 dab of glue on each one of those tabs and maybe just run a really light bead along the seam, and that'll hold it in place real nice. Now let's go ahead and put this main assembly into the bottom part of the case. Just take your switch plate and route it through the hole at the back part of the case, and just kind of wiggle and rest the rest of the assembly down into the bottom part of the case. Just make sure all your wires are tucked underneath that steel mesh piece, and make sure it sits down nice and solid. Then looking up from the bottom, you can go ahead and install those 2 other screws on the outside that will attach the bottom part of the case to that main assembly. Make sure all your wires are tucked in nice and tight, and go ahead and snap that switch plate cover into place. Take the top part of your case and just sit it down right on top of the whole unit. If you look along the edge of the tank, you should notice that the tank rests flush against that front bezel. If you have a big gap at the top, you can open up that flap on the bottom part of the case and just tighten up those 2 adjusting bolts that hold the back part of the tank up. Just give them a couple of turns each time, and flip it back over and check your gap again from the top of the tank to the top of that front bezel, and it should just come up nice and flush against there. Make sure you don't go too far, but just bring it up nice and snug so it gets a good fit. Now let's install the filter. You're going to want to remove the filter from the packaging. Install the tube onto the bottom part of the filter. Just stick it right into place, and then open the filter up and remove the filter cartridge from its packaging. Next, we're going to attach the hose to the bottom part of that filter tube, and go ahead and moisten the suction cups and attach the filter to the top part of the tank, and run the hose right around to the air pump. You can trim any excess off that hose once you figure out where you want the filter to sit. I recommend leaving some extra and running your filter for a couple of weeks to make sure you like where it is, and then you can trim the rest of that hose off for a better fit. Now you can unwind your power cord and poke the plug through the original power cord hole in the back of the computer and just pull out the rest of the cord. Now you have the option to install the Apple logo back into place or just leave it out. I like to leave mine out, that way I can feed the fish through that Apple logo hole instead of lifting the case off every time. So there you have it, that's it. That's your finished iMac aquarium. Fill it with water, add some decorations, add some fish, and enjoy. There's few like it in the world, and you've just built your own. Feel free to like the Facebook page, send me any questions, comments. I'd love to see a picture of your aquarium when you get it all set up and running with fish and everything like that. It's really fun to see what everybody does with their tanks and where they set them up and how they decorate them. So feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions during any part of the assembly, and enjoy.